Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for this discussion. My name is Brian Hanlon. I am the founder and CEO of California YIMBY. Thank you. If you've heard of any big housing bills, we're probably the org behind it. So at California YIMBY, our mission is to make California an affordable place to live, work, and raise a family. But let me ask you something. Is California affordable? Yeah, no. Raise your hands if you think the rent is too high and home prices are too high. Oof, okay. So despite our recent legislative successes, we have a lot more work to do, which also means the next governor of California will have a lot more work to do. So we are here today to discuss the concrete housing policy and enforcement decisions that our next governor will make. Audience members and pro-housing activists from across the state submitted most of the questions that I'll be asking today. One housekeeping note. Much like the supply of housing in California, we have a shortage of time for this discussion. So please, out of respect for your fellow neighbors in the panel, do not exceed your allotted time. Please mind the clock at the front of the stage. This is a forum, not a debate, so candidates, please refrain from bringing up rival candidates in your answers. I will interject if we are over time or grossly off topic. So let's get to it. I'm going to introduce all the candidates, and then we'll proceed with opening statements, so please hold your applause until the end. Representative I'm going to go in order. Representative Katie Porter. Former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra. Representative Eric Swalwell. Former State Controller, Betty Yee. Tom Steyer. San Jose Mayor, Matt Mahan. And State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. Now to opening statements. Each candidate has 1 minute to introduce themselves and say why they are the best candidate to end California's housing crisis. The order in which I call on candidates now and from here on out has been randomized. Secretary Becerra.
So Brian, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. And yes to more housing, yes to doing the development that we need. What I will tell you is, as the son of immigrants, first in my family to have an opportunity to go to a university, I understand what it means when you can work hard and actually then own a home. Because a construction worker and clerical worker somehow were able to do that, even though they never got to step into a college classroom. We need to get back to those days when we rewarded those who work hard, who may be the hardest working, the lowest paid, but still could somehow figure out how to own their own home. And so my job is to get us there. But right now we've got this crisis that we have to deal with, man-made crisis from DC or the affordability crisis here. That's what we have to tackle. I intend to be the governor that can do that.
Thank you, Secretary, for that brief on time remarks. Okay, now we got the clock working. Superintendent Thurman, you're up next.
Hi, thank you for being here. Good afternoon. You know, I have a plan to build 2 million housing units that builds on using the surplus property that exists in every single county in this state. These houses can be built without additional permitting from cities and counties, and we can provide 2.3 million units by the year 2030. We have to address homelessness in our state, and we have to address the affordability crisis. As governor, I intend to provide working Californians and middle-class Californians with a tax credit to help provide additional money in your pocket every month to cover the rising costs of gas, groceries, and housing. Until we can see true reduction in costs in housing, we're going to help Californians to have access to more revenue to cover those costs. A better California is possible. Let us build it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
I'm going to be a day one Democrat on housing. It's what I did as a planning commissioner and a city council member in my hometown of Dublin. It was the 13th place that I had lived in California and the 11th high school I went to before graduating high school. My parents moved all over California. It was a place of low income and lower expectations. But I came home because everyone else around Dublin had gone no growth, but we were building like crazy. And we worked with builders and developers to build new schools, new police stations, new fire stations, new senior centers. We also worked with small businesses to waive any permitting that got in the way and any fees that were barriers to entry. In the high school that I graduated from in 1999, where 25% of us went to college, today, 96% go to college. They used to call us Scrublin. They don't call us Scrublin anymore. We did it there in Dublin, and I'm going to do that turnaround story from Scrublin to Dublin all over the state.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I want to thank you guys for having us here today. And California YIMBY had a fantastic year last year. SB 79, fantastic. CEQA reform, fantastic. And by the way, I publicly supported both of those initiatives strongly. When we think about housing and affordability, housing is at the center of affordability. I've said we'll build 1 million houses. How are we going to do that? There is no silver bullet in housing. It is silver buckshot. Multiple areas where we need to make progress. And the ones that we've been talking about permitting reform, about zoning reform, yes, you guys are on it and it's going to happen. People don't talk enough about how much it costs to build per square foot. And I can tell you, there's technology, it's here to reduce it right now by 36%, and that's going to grow. We need to bring down the cost of housing. We need to build houses. We got to make it legal to build houses in California again.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
Good afternoon. Good morning, YIMBYs. It feels like afternoon already when you're at convention. I'm Katie Porter. I'm a single mother of 3 teenagers, and if this campaign had a sub-slogan, it would be "Make sure my kids don't live on my couch." I am running to make sure the next generation of Californians and everybody who's already here is able to have housing. My background is in housing. I got my start in California Public Service when our then Attorney General Kamala Harris asked me to serve as the state's foreclosure prevention monitor, holding the big banks who did a lot of damage to housing in California accountable and helping prevent foreclosures and evictions. I am really committed to innovating in housing. I want to be the governor for good ideas, and good ideas come from groups like YIMBY who work together, who test things, who are willing to go back and adjust laws and iterate them to get them exactly right. We must innovate in construction, in finance, in design, and together we will create a whole new generation of housing for Californians.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
Good morning, fellow YIMBYs. I'm Matt Mahan. I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning. Our housing shortage is a man-made crisis that is stealing our collective future. As a big city mayor, I'm the only candidate who has again and again, dozens of times, stared down the forces of special interests and NIMBYism to get housing built. In San Jose, we have moved infill housing projects to ministerial approvals. We've dramatically reduced one-time fees, including unfunded inclusionary requirements, embraced AI to speed up permitting, eliminated parking minimums, and as a result, we've seen thousands of homes break ground and thousands more will this year. As governor, I will cap excessive fees, industrialize housing production in California factories, and take on building codes that increase costs without making us safer so we can have a housing abundant future for everyone in California.
Thank you. And finally, Controller Yee.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As your former controller, very much involved with the state's housing financing programs. For all of the work that YIMBY has done, it is now time for the state to begin to really focus on implementation. And when I say implementation, implementation with urgency. It is about how we align our financing programs to be able to fulfill the promise of the whole package of legislation that was passed this past year. And when I look at the work that's ahead, what we have to do is to be sure that we're holding our local jurisdictions accountable. And there are ways to do that, but I hope that we can bring now better accountability and transparency to how we're going to meet the housing needs of California and also be able to keep costs down. I know from an economic perspective that for the past 2 decades, our economic growth and health of California was going to be stagnant if we don't do anything about housing security and housing affordability. So really look forward to the partnership together going forward.
Thank you. And thanks to all candidates for abiding by the 1 minute time. Really appreciate it. So now we're going to jump into our first question series. For the yes/no questions, please answer with a yes or a no. But you may elaborate with one sentence but please no German-style compound sentences with 12 subordinate clauses. Keep it brief. For the open-ended questions, you will have 45 seconds to answer. So let's start with a yes or no question. Do you think California's housing shortage is primarily the result of local and state regulatory barriers to home building?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get the clock people. It should be 45 seconds, not a minute. For these. Please, Representative.
Yes, I think that is a big, big driver of it, and I think we're working on solutions to that. Our localities need funding, and what they have been doing is using housing, adding fees. So I think the legislation that you're working on that would require the disclosure of fees at the beginning of a project, the requirements up front so they don't keep being additive and delaying projects is a really big innovation. It's not our only problem. We also need a lot of innovation in how we finance homeownership to make it available to people who can't get to that 20% down payment. I think we also need to innovate in construction, and there's a real opportunity to speed up construction and drive down cost. But anybody who thinks that localities are not a problem hasn't had to represent Huntington Beach like this girl.
Okay, and let me, again, this was the yes or no question series, and so I should have interjected bad moderating on my part, so no worries. And so again, just to remind folks, the question, the question is, do you think California's housing shortage is primarily the result of local and state regulatory barriers to home building? And up next, we have Secretary Becerra.
Yes, but do I get to add on a?
You get one set, yeah, longer sentence, sure.
Yes, but I think probably the underlying issue here is that we've never had good state policy for housing in California. It's all driven by localities. And we finally have to get to the point where we make it clear. Whether you live in the southern or northern or western or eastern part, we should have a coherent statewide strategy so that no one jurisdiction can try to stop the development where we need it. So yes, but let's have a stronger state footprint on how we do housing so we can coordinate it and not let wealthy communities get away with not doing their fair share and having the lower income communities having to do everything.
Fair enough. And we'll give 45 seconds to everyone else now. Bad moderating on my part. Let's go to Mr. Steyer.
So the question is regulation the biggest problem? I started by saying this is not a silver bullet question, this is a silver buckshot question. But I do think that regulation probably is the biggest part of the problem, and it's not a simple question. It's a couple of different things. One of the things is local cities and counties don't want to build housing because they feel like they're going to get a mandate to provide services and not the money to actually deliver those services, which is why they slow roll everything. As you may know, and I've been trying to shout, I'm going to pass a proposition to end the corporate real estate tax loophole, which brings about $20 billion to localities for health care and education, which are the things they think they can't afford to pay for. So that's the first part. But I think the second part is this: we've overregulated. And I'm someone who spent years on environmentalism, but I think we're at a point where we're using regulation to stop all building, and that's actually true, which is why CEQA reform was necessary.
Okay.
So when I think about how this is going to go.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. I think the clock got started a little bit later there. So if we could just start the clock as soon as they start speaking, thank you. Mayor Mahan, you're up next.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulation has been at the heart of the problem. The next phase of work, though, to unblock housing in our state is really going to come down to tackling cost of construction, specifically capping impact fees, industrializing housing production, and the hardest but most important is likely getting into the weeds of the building code, because we have a lot of layers of requirements that represent regulatory capture and drive up costs without making us safer. And as governor, I will put significant effort into working with you all to pull those costs out of our codes.
Thank you. Controller Yee.
Yes, I think regulations have become a barrier, both at the state and local level, but equally important is our funding and financing. And so I hope we can actually align our funding and financing to meet the goals of what we're trying to do relative to expanding housing supply and having it be affordable and secure for everyone.
Thank you. Superintendent Thurman.
Yes. If you think about it, if it takes 6 years in some counties to permit a project, that is a huge barrier. Who will do that? No one. I think our cities, that's why I passed a law for junior accessory dwelling units when I was in the legislature, and we can create flexible ways to build more housing stock. Our cities, but think about what also has happened. While this has happened, our cities and counties lost redevelopment. When I was a city council member, we built thousands of units and promoted economic development. And when redevelopment was taken away, cities and counties have lost an important resource. The state shouldn't just pass down mandates without providing resources to our communities. We have to continue. We have to provide down payment assistance loans and other resources to Californians to be able to buy a home as well. And we will do this as governor.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
Yes, on housing, California is a blue state held down by red tape. And when I say I'll be a day one Democrat, I'm going to put shot clocks in place. I've always believed that a goal without a deadline is a dream, and Californians are done dreaming. So 90 days for every agency to make a yes or no decision on housing. So that's Fish and Game, that's Coastal, that's Fire Marshal. They're going to have 90 days. If we put more deadlines in place, we'll see fewer reports and more rooftops. That's what being a day one Democrat is.
Thank you. Now, let's move along to talk about politics here. So which political risk are you prepared to take as governor to solve California's housing crisis? For example, name one or more powerful interest groups that you would take on. And we're going to start off, these are 45-second questions, thank you. We're going to start off with Superintendent Thurman.
Easy. I would take on the homeowners insurance folks, because look at what happened, the fires in the Palisades and Altadena and other places, and people pay their premiums, and then when we need support, these companies say, sorry, we're not going to insure you. And then right after that, these companies were given a rate increase. I'm sorry, where I come from, when you do a poor job, you don't get a raise. And as governor, I will say if you don't write policies, you're not going to get a rate increase. I'm sponsoring legislation right now that would help to provide another $10 billion of funding for building affordable housing. I mentioned that we can build 2 million units. And so we're going to hold industries accountable, including the homeowners insurance industry.
Thank you. Controller Yee.
Similar with the superintendent, but I also want to bring back redevelopment financing. And that will be a fight with our education community. It is was dissolved because we had a budget shortfall years ago. But I have to ask them, where are our educators living today? And so this will be a financing tool that's so critical for our local governments to have incentive to continue to increase supply with urgency, and gives them some authority back with respect to the financing of infrastructure as well.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
The president has declared war on California, and the amount of money that we have to do redevelopment, the amount of money we have to do housing, the amount of money we have to do infrastructure is at risk when the president takes away health care, closes rural hospitals, pulls port security funding, gets rid of cancer research funding. I will be a fighter protector every single day on offense. I'll work with Speaker Jeffries, who's going to be the Speaker of the House, to work to claw back as much that we have already lost, as I did when I was on Speaker Pelosi's leadership team in 2019. We have a lot of leverage when we're in the majority. That gives us a bigger pot to work with to meet our housing and transportation needs.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
So I agree with Superintendent Thurman that we have to tackle this insurance crisis that we have. And if you think about it, insurance is a numbers game. You're just spreading risk. So there's no reason why any insurance company should be bailing out of California, especially after years and years of collecting premiums from so many California payers. We just have to have them show the books so we can see how they balance their records. And they're entitled to make a profit, but they're not entitled to just skip out of town when they think it's easy. The second thing I would add, though, it's a close race, is wealthy communities who feel very comfortable where they are. We have to get them to participate. They're Californians as well, and we need them to understand that we're all in this boat together. We lift all boats, but we have to have them participate as well.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
You know, there are a lot of interests that we will have to take on to build more housing, but one that hasn't been mentioned that's maybe the most significant is a tough conversation we need to have with our friends in the environmental movement. And that doesn't mean sacrificing the quality of our air or our water, but it does mean further streamlining of review processes and CEQA and related requirements. And the truth is, here in the Bay Area, where I've been an aggressively pro-housing mayor, every time we push housing out to the periphery or even out of state, it increases our carbon footprint. It's not actually doing us any favors to make it harder to do upzoning and infill and densify our cities. And so we're gonna have to have some tough conversations with our friends in the environmental movement.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
So it's easy to say something like, I would take on apathy. That is a powerful interest. But I watched what happened with SB 79, and I came out for it. I think it was the first candidate on the stage to come out for it. We know who opposed it. It was our friends in labor. And we really have to protect their right to organize residential workers, to grow that unionized workforce. But labor is a big family, and there are a lot of folks in labor who make a lot less than the building trades, and they're not able to afford our homes. So there's a lot of division here in the labor community. I think there is a path to a residential residential union construction workforce, but they need to get on that path, not just say no to housing. And this answer is going to get me in a hell of a lot of trouble. But that was our biggest barrier in SB 79 and the other bills you all have done.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I have a history of taking on funded special interests, corporate special interests, including oil companies, tobacco companies, and out-of-state companies that weren't paying their California state taxes. In this case, what I'm talking about when I'm saying we're going to roll back the corporate real estate tax loophole, actually, I completely agree with Mayor Mahan that localities are trying to stop us. So we're going to have to get that $20 billion and use it as an incentive for people to actually approve building. That means taking on people in split roll who are going to fight, because that's $20 billion out of their pocket, and they're going to hate me for it. But we're going to have to do it. I'm willing to do it. I'm confident we can win. I've never lost to those guys.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask candidate-specific questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. Mr. Steyer.
I was just done.
I asked my coworker Claude to randomize everything, and so sometimes whoever begins, first and last. Anyways, Mr. Steyer, you've been active in climate policy, advocacy, and philanthropy for 20 years. But many large environmental organizations in California oppose basic pro-housing policies like zoning reform to allow multifamily housing near train stations. And their major funders often back the opponents of pro-housing policies. How will you work with or stand up to many of your historic supporters and allies who argue that that we don't need to build more homes?
So it is true that I've been a strong environmentalist for a really long time. And it's also true that I supported SB 79. And it's also true that I believe that zoning houses in a dense place around public transportation is by far the strongest environmental thing you can do. And so how am I going to stand up to environmental groups? I think I know those people very well. And I think that I'm on the other side of this issue. And that's fine with me. Because let's talk about environmentalism for a second, and in terms of, not just of land use, but how we think about the whole thing. We're at a place where we can win environmentally by being, I say 3 things. Make the polluter pay, okay? That doesn't have anything to do, in terms of land use, that means cutting down on transportation, which is our big emission. Make sure you're aware of environmental justice at every issue, because we have structural racism and prejudice built into our system, and you need to be intentional about responding to it. But third, and this is really critical for house building, it's really critical for environmentalism in terms of how we're going to win. We have the technology to win. We have the technology to win environmentally. I wrote a book, which I advise you all to pay full retail for. Sorry.
Not enough money.
Called Cheaper, Faster, Better, How We Win the Climate War. And that's what I would say here too. We have the technology to build much cheaper. I completely agree with Katie Porter that we're going to have to work it so that those are good paying jobs. They're not on site, but we're going to drop the price per square foot by right now 36%. So when I think about environmentalism, my point is, let's also be practical. Let's not lose our values, but let's understand about how to get to our values in new ways. It's available right now. We can win this, and I believe that I know the people there and can bring them along.
Thank you. And now, I had earlier asked candidates not to refer to other candidates on stage, but if you're saying that you agree and nice things, I guess that's fine. You can be nice. All right, I'll allow that. Okay. Next up, Secretary Becerra. Many YIMBYs are concerned by the fact that, as Attorney General, you didn't hold many cities accountable to state housing law. Is that a fair criticism? Is there anything that you would have done differently during your time as Attorney General, knowing what you know now?
Well, maybe they didn't read that I took on San Mateo when it tried to stop the development of, Brian, a project that you were behind. Mm-hmm. And that is the seminal case now that is referred to over and over in Protecting Housing Accountability Act that lets us have a policy that lets us build. Perhaps they weren't aware that I sued Huntington Beach because they were not willing to allow their housing element to go full forward. Perhaps they were not aware that I actually took action throughout the state, Google it, and what you'll find is that I used the laws to make sure, one, we built, but two, we built smart. Let me give you a quick example where I did intervene using CEQA. There was a project in the San Diego County area which was in the hills, and by the way, this was back in the 20-teens, before all this wildfire stuff really started to hit so hard. They were going to build this development of thousands of homes in the hills, high fire intensity areas, with only one form of egress for the entire development. And I said, wait a minute, that won't fly under our laws. You need to change that, otherwise you're creating a safety hazard. There is no evacuation here for thousands of people you intend to have housed there. The developers didn't want to make a change because it would cost them more money. So we intervened to make sure if you're going to build it right. But I have actually been the Attorney General who took action when the case in the district court had lost. California RLA had lost against San Mateo. We intervened at the appellate level, and the result was we have a housing accountability law that's still in place. I'm very proud of the actions I've taken, but I've done it smart because we have to make sure whether it is in hills or whether it is in urban areas, we do it for people for the right reasons.
Thank you. Controller Yee, as State Controller, can you point to an example where you found waste, fraud, or abuse in how the state funds its housing programs? If so, what did you do about it?
Thank you. I think not a specific example about waste, fraud, and abuse, but I will say that with respect to the tax credit allocation committee, and the rules by which we scored projects, where I found to be the most lacking was that it didn't have accountability with respect to what we were investing relative to tax credit. Was that going to bring us the broadest public benefit? Because what we have in the state is actually a fragmented system of different financing programs. And so in that committee, you saw a sliver of the financing for a project. And what I have proposed 2 years in a row to the legislature was streamline it so we have a single allocation committee. It actually would help cut time to break ground on projects, but more importantly, will help us determine just what is the benefit that we're getting with all of these different financing programs, including our tax credits. And so this is what we have to do. This is how the state can actually contribute to implementing all of the great work that you have done to try to expedite housing supply. And so I would say the waste, fraud, and abuse is probably not there, but the lack of accountability was.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan, you have pointed to your progress on housing as mayor, but as recently as 2024, I don't believe a single unsubsidized multifamily development broke ground in San Jose, where now the median home price is $1.4 million. How do you respond to critics who say the reality on the ground hasn't matched your rhetoric?
Yeah, I was as concerned as everyone as we saw permits for new multifamily continuing to decline in my first year as mayor, and jumped into that problem by partnering with everyone in our home building space, all of the stakeholders, to say, how do we get any cost out of this system so that we can turn things around? We shifted to ministerial approvals. I championed the most aggressive reduction in fees, including a huge fight over eliminating unfunded inclusionary requirements. As you know, fees can be 10 to 20% of project cost, and I led the charge in making the argument to my colleagues on the council who were skeptical. This was not a unanimous vote. Interest groups and folks who wanted to protect fees, that it's better to get the building in the ground, give people housing, have the economic growth, the ongoing property and sales tax revenue, than have fees that look good on paper but make projects infeasible. And so I've tried to use every lever at my disposal in the city of San Jose at the city level to bring down costs, get projects to pencil. And from that abysmal first year of 0 permits pulled for new market rate multifamily, we've continued to invest aggressively in affordable. But since that package of reforms that I championed over a lot of opposition, last year we had over 2,000 new homes get under construction that had been stuck in the pipeline for years. And this year we will have thousands more break ground, because the problem is we've been very pro-housing in San Jose and many other cities. In fact, we approved over 20,000 homes that weren't getting built because they didn't pencil. And that's why the focus has to be on the cost side of the equation, the building codes, the impact fees, all the little things that layer up to make these projects never actually get built, even when we celebrate a beautiful rendering.
Thank you. Representative Porter, you have been a vocal critic of corporate greed. Many of the achievements of the YIMBY movement have passed with large, diverse coalitions, including business groups on one hand, labor unions on the other, progressive Democrats, even conservative rural Republicans. So as governor, how would you maintain this bipartisan pro-housing coalition, and how would you grow the pro-housing movement while still staying true to your values?
Corporations are a positive entity. They create jobs, they help businesses organize, they help them develop. But corporations need to be honoring the promise. We give their owners and their shareholders benefits under our tax laws, under our corporate laws, and in return, they should price their things honestly, pay their employees a living wage, and pay their fair share of taxes. So that's how I think about the contract that government has with corporations. I think it is a gigantic win to celebrate that the housing movement is breaking down some of these barriers and some of these divisions between groups. I hear it over and over again, including from large corporations, including CoreLogic, which is the biggest housing data company in the United States in Irvine. Why can't you grow? Why aren't you growing here in California? Why are you adding divisions in Texas? Why? Because there isn't housing that their workers can afford. So we need this to be, the business community needs to be all bought in here, because they are actually losing their ability to grow, their ability to expand, their ability to take advantage of new markets, because they can't get workers who can afford to live here. People compare the cost of housing, they compare what they're getting paid. We're paying a premium on salaries in California, but Californians know it is still not enough to overcome. We have more jobs per housing unit in California than the vast majority, if not all, other states. So the job piece is there. Business is understanding now that they need to be part of a pro-housing coalition. I would say the environmentalists are moving slowly, but I see good directionality among the environmental movement. To be an environmentalist is to be pro-housing. To be a good business is to be pro-housing. And I think that is a very consistent message with all of my work, with or without a whiteboard, to call out CEOs who are straight up cheating people and lying on the witness stand. Those are two wildly different things. So don't cheat, don't steal, don't lie, and I'm going to have no problem with you growing your business and backing pro-growth policies, including housing.
Thank you. Thank you. Superintendent Thurman, you were first elected to the Assembly in 2014 and then superintendent in 2018. So during this time, California's housing crisis has worsened. California's public school enrollment has declined, I believe, each of the last consecutive 8 years, while many teachers and school staff struggle to afford housing. Can you point to work you have done to help address the housing shortage and affordability crisis? Are critics who say that Sacramento has failed, is that fair?
I would say that for the last 5 years, I have led the fight to secure $500 million in the low-income housing tax credit to support many projects, including educator housing. The 2 million units of housing that I talked about building on surplus property that schools have is largely intended to support educator housing for those who have to recruit far and travel far from where they live because they can't afford to live in the places where they work. We can expand that housing to include not just teachers, but other workforce sectors that have also been pushed out. Our first responders, nurses, city and government employees. You know, my last year in the legislature, my proposal was to put, when we had surpluses, was to say we should be putting $1 billion into building affordable housing every single year. I'll be honest, a lot of my colleagues were more interested in being able to get a check mark on a scorecard to say how much money they sent to their district. And the state hasn't invested in affordable housing. The federal government hasn't invested nothing in affordable housing. HUD has done absolutely nothing for California and the rest of the nation. This 2 million housing plan that I've talked about if we simply built 12 units on each of those parcels, we get to 2.3 million units by the year 2030. And 2030. So we can help expedite things. We have to provide the down payment assistance programs for people to be able to own a home again. The American dream is slipping away. We live in a state where we are not competitive with other states. We enjoy great benefits in terms of environmental protections. We enjoy the beauty of what we have, but we are no longer competitive. We have to reconcile those conversations with how we're going to make it more affordable for those who are actually building the housing. I brought together the labor unions and the builders to talk about that so we can find solutions and compromise to build more housing and make it affordable in the state of California.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell, similar question for you. You've been in Congress for 14 years, representing a district that has some of the highest housing costs in the entire country. Can you point to any legislation you've written or helped pass in Congress that would bring down cost for Californians?
In Congress, I've introduced legislation with the realtors that would give teachers down payment assistance. And building on what the superintendent just said, too often we find that the most important people in our community, teachers, police officers, firefighters, first responders, they're not able to live near where they work. And so I wanted to work and build on what we had done in Dublin when I was on the city council, which was to have a down payment assistance program as well. Also, you're looking at a guy who still has about $75,000 in student loan debt. I was proud to be the first in my family to go to college. However, I know that for first-time homebuyers, particularly in California, student loan debt is a barrier to being able to get that down payment together. And unless you have parents who are able to help out, that pathway is even harder to achieve. So I have legislation that I've worked on in Congress to have the interest on student loan debt zero. The government should not make money on students, particularly when it is a barrier for first-time homebuyers. And so I will be mindful of that we're a state where the average first-time homebuyer is 40 years old. And my promise to you is that when we get this right, and there's a lot that a governor does with appointments to the Board of Regents and overseeing the greatest education system in the world, but one that's too costly and not accessible enough, that we have to be mindful that this state has to be one where you can take your first job, have your first kid, and buy your first home, God forbid, in the same decade. I did that work in Congress. I did that work on the city council to increase pathways to home ownership, and that's my day one priority as the next governor.
Thank you. Now, let's talk about local control for a minute. How do you weigh the concerns of local officials and those who need more affordable housing? It's probably no secret that some of my friends in local government don't always love every single bill that California YIMBY sponsors. So let's start out with, it's going to be a yes or no question, but I'm still going to give you 45 seconds. I'm going to skip the next question. All right. The question is, when local jurisdictions repeatedly fail to achieve their housing goals or refuse to comply with state housing laws, should the state government assume any zoning approvals or other land use powers? Mr. Steyer, you're up first.
So it's a yes or no question. Let me say this.
Start with a yes or no and then answer.
We should be holding them responsible to living up to the laws of the state of California. Yes. But let's talk about it for a second, because one size doesn't fit all. And one of the things I've been talking about is bringing $20 billion new dollars to local jurisdictions for education and health by closing this corporate real estate tax loophole. That is otherwise described as leverage. You have a lot of money that you are delivering to them for their purposes, and in return, they should be in open discussion and willful discussion to get done what they have to get done on behalf of the whole state. We need the leverage. We should use the leverage. We should demand that they obey the law.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
Yes, and I would expand on AB 1294 and have more by right approvals, particularly for urban infill development, also for climate-related projects, and really support the Attorney General in their ability to enforce RENA.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
Yes, absolutely. Look, we've done a lot in recent years to make the housing element more robust and to put teeth into it. And there are local nuances and variables that we have to look at. San Jose, for example, was zoned almost entirely as a residential city, so we have huge tax base issues. So we do have to take into account a certain amount of flexibility, but we have continued to be incredibly pro-housing. And I think the state should come in and cap excessive fees, should require ministerial or by right approval for conforming uses when we've already gone through a process that includes public input and said we want housing here. It shouldn't take another year or two to then get a second approval to do it. And for bad actors, for cities that are not implementing the policies and programs that enable more housing production, the state needs to use the legal system and or step in to hold them in other ways, to hold them
Thank you, Mr.
accountable
Mayor.
for following the law.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Superintendent Thurman.
I don't know that it's ever a good idea for the state to carry out the local planning decisions in any community. I think the state's job is to hold local jurisdictions responsible for their RENA numbers and for providing resources and incentives. There should be no unfunded mandates coming from the state. There are ways to enforce these rules, but I think that the state should be looking at ways to give resources. I think the state has to create what would look like consistent policies all across cities and counties all across the state for how to make ministerial approvals, for how to reduce the time that it takes to permit a project, and to give incentives to cities to do just that, to reduce the time to permit and to make for more by right and ministerial approvals.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
Yes, cities and counties are subdivisions of the state of California. They operate as part of the state. They are not independent of the state. They are not sovereigns. And so, yes, we need to have statewide policy. But let's recognize somebody's got to build the infrastructure, the plumbing, the electrical. They need resources. And after Prop 13 and with the loss of redevelopment funds, they are strapped. And so, to Tom's point, we have to make sure the resources are there so we can have good infrastructure, because I guarantee what will happen. In wealthier communities, you'll have great infrastructure. In poor communities, they'll get shortchanged. Not on my watch.
Thank you. Controller Yee.
Yes, and if equity is an ultimate goal of what we're all trying to achieve relative to housing, I would say that we really need to understand why jurisdictions are not doing their part. And a lot of it, I think, is going to be fiscal constraints. And I think the state should be a better partner with our local governments in terms of how we look at meeting infrastructure needs. I think we should give our local governments more authority that goes along with their responsibility, like lowering the vote threshold for local housing bonds and other measures. And also looking at how the state can be a better partner in incentivizing business development so that we're not just talking about housing, but how we're building economically and environmentally sustainable communities for the long term.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
A lot of cities are not building because they just don't want to. Trust me, Newport Beach has the money to build. They're not under fiscal constraints. They're NIMBYs. Let's just call it what it is. Look, RENA has a collaborative process in it. There's an opportunity for jurisdictions and areas to come up with these goals. They're not imposed. They're constructed together, but people treat them as completely aspirational and blow them off. Attorney General Bonta used to do me the kindness of calling me to give me a heads up when he was going to sue Huntington Beach, which meant we talked every week. And look, it's what the housing is going to be in any given community is going to look different. Different styles, different types, different formats. But everybody has to get in the game here. Everybody.
Thank you. Now, the job of being governor isn't just about policy. It's also about management. So let's discuss which qualities and job experiences would you prioritize when hiring staff to manage and direct housing policy in the governor's office and to run the Department of Housing and Community Development? And Controller Yee, we'll start with you.
I would say who I would look for is someone who is comfortable working with diverse stakeholders, someone who has an understanding of housing finance, and also someone who's not afraid to just call out the progress that we're making or not. Look, this is about really doing right for Californians. We have to have the highest degree of accountability and transparency, and if we're not doing well, we've got to own it and go back to the legislature and to say, look, we've got some barriers here that need to be resolved. Let's work on this together. But implementation is going to be really, really key. And so I want someone with a fine eye to detail, but also not afraid to reach out to different constituencies when we run into hurdles.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
It's pretty straightforward. Get someone who's got the experience in that particular area. When it comes to housing, you get someone who comes from the sector, someone who actually knows how to build, someone who's had to run through the hoops and can get this done. Let me tell you what happens when you don't get people who understand what they're doing and they're political cronies or they are your big fundraising donors. You get people who don't know how to get things done, and they're deer in front of headlights when the big issue gets in front of them. I will tell you that from having to deal with COVID, trying to get vaccines to 340 million people with 50 states who govern healthcare. I had to figure out a way to work with 50 states to make sure that the 700 million vaccines that we put into your arms got done right. And you have to have people who know what they're doing.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
So first I would shop for people who have good ideas. I think good ideas sometimes are in short supply in government. I come from being a professor where ideas are the coin of the realm, so I want to hear good ideas from every quarter of California. The second thing is, how do you test and stress test an idea? You look at the data, you see what is happening and what isn't happening. There's a powerful story here with CalCourt, where we've had like a dozen actual adjudicated cases. It was a good idea, but it's not working. The data shows that. The third thing is, I think someone who can make partnerships with the legislature. You can't do everything on day one as governor because the legislature needs to pass these laws. So thinking about people who can do that. The last thing is somebody who spots barriers and figures out how to lower them. So build coalitions.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
So as I think a number of us have referenced, we probably all agree, part of it is having a facilitator who understands the different stakeholders, has relationships, and can bring people together to form a governing coalition to make progress. But the piece that is most important is a relentless focus on outcomes and bringing a new level of accountability to the work that we're doing together, even when it makes people uncomfortable. In San Jose, we have led the way in reducing unsheltered homelessness by pulling people out of different departments, having them co-located, doing a daily stand-up with a relentless focus on achieving the goal, which has meant sacrificing a lot of sacred cows along the way because we're all working towards something bigger and more important collectively. That's the mindset we need.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I've started and run a lot of organizations, and hiring people is always the same thing. The first thing you have to ask is, do you share the values of what you're trying to accomplish? Because if you don't, people will be working at cross purposes and they'll be making decisions on the wrong basis. The second is culture. Are you someone who can work with the different organizations, bring together a coalition and get things done. And the third thing is competence. Because if you don't have those first two things, it isn't going to work. But look, I'm talking to California YIMBY. We all know you've got to be able to read a P&L. You've got to be able to go through the numbers and understand how it really works. So that's all it is. It's values, culture, competence. You have that, we'll get a great team.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
Because of the work that you all have done, this is a housing election, and I will govern accordingly. I will have a team that moves with speed and can work under deadlines. It'll be partners with you all, and they'll have experience. They'll know every line item of a pro forma and what is driving up the costs for Californians. But I also know that the governor of California appoints more people to boards and commissions than anyone in the world other than the President of the United States. And I will make sure that every person on our team has a get shit done mentality, recognizing who are the people that are affected by this. And it's people like my parents, who every month didn't have enough to pay the rent usually, and really wanted to be in a state where they could eventually be homeowners.
Thank you. Superintendent Thurman.
I would echo what my colleagues have said about someone who's a team player and who can bring people to the table as governor. I will ask California YIMBY and other partners to give input to help shape the policy. But there's one thing that I think is so critical, and there's no one person that I would hire, but a team of folks who have the lived experience of actually having to build housing, who understands what the budget means. I spent time with some builders recently who told me that they lose so much on projects. They just sell it to get it off the books because they're losing so much money. I want someone who can say, been there, done that, either because they've been a builder, they've built housing, or they've worked for a nonprofit entity where they can say, I've delivered on housing, so we can deliver for you and deliver on housing in California.
Thank you. Now let's talk about defining success. What does housing success look like to you after 4 years in office? Please cite measurable outcomes. They might look like units built, the share of Californians who are homeowners, prices stabilized, population growth, whichever metrics you prefer. And we're going to start with Representative Porter.
So I would say the percentage of the people's incomes that they're devoting to housing is a really important measure. It's a long-standing one. We used to talk about 30%. Now you're darn lucky if it's under 50. So that is, I think, a really, really important measure. Affordability is not just about your income. It's also about your expenses, and that measure captures that mismatch. I also think population growth is really important. It's important to California's economic engine, and it's important to our revenue long-term. We are a rapidly aging state. If we are not bringing young people here, they are not choosing to stay here and start a family here, they're not coming to California, long term, that's going to be really hard for our revenue. So those are two right at the top.
Thank you. Superintendent Thurman.
Well, I stated my report card objective right up front, right? We build 2.3 million housing units by the year 2030. I'm being very specific. I have sponsored legislation that will help school districts in actually building and partnering with developers to build the housing and to have some startup funds to do the pre-development work that is necessary to do this. And so I'm putting that out there. I also plan to make sure that we can provide down payment assistance programs for our first-time homebuyer programs. California has had them but hasn't funded them. What good is it to have the program and not fund it at a time when Californians need this? And I'm going to be focused on building the wages of Californians. I don't see housing prices going down. We have to build the wages of California to be able to afford and thrive and stay in California.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I was sitting here trying to think of the 4 things I'd measure, and here are the 4 things I'd measure. One is the number of houses, because we absolutely have to build houses. The second thing is the price of housing, because people are being priced out, and we can't afford to build houses unless we bring down the cost. The third is, okay, housing's not just housing. Who's buying the houses? Are we doing, low-income housing? Are we doing moderate-income housing? Are we doing teacher housing? How we break that down is going to be unbelievably important to me. And the fourth thing is this. There are an awful lot of renters in this state. I'm for rent control. I am going to care a lot about what rent is because people have to be able to make rent. So I am going to be following that really closely, and I believe in rent control.
Thank you. Controller Yee.
Certainly the number of houses that we're adding to the supply. But I also want to look at this statewide because I don't want this to be about a shifting of burdens from areas that have more capacity than others because we need housing supply in all parts of the state. And then secondly, looking at is it really driving down the number of people who are feeling housing insecure, both renters and those who are homeowners.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
I'll look at the average rents and whether they're stabilizing or coming down in each region of California. I'll also look at the average age of a first-time home buyer. Of course, the per units added in each category, whether it's single-family, multifamily, affordable, transit-oriented, workforce housing, but also the speed at which we are supplying new housing for the state. Again, we have to have more shot clocks in place. If it takes more than a few years to get a housing application approved, someone from the governor's office should come and help you hang the drywall. That's going to be the mandate that you all are giving us, and those are some of the measurements that will be important to me.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
So I want to get a quick accounting in my first 100 days on how many near shovel-ready projects there are, and then I want to swarm them and make them shovel-ready projects, because that will give people in California a clear sense that we are going to build. Secondly, I agree with some of the candidates who also mentioned this, rent stabilization. We have to make sure that we address the outliers in the market, both the landlords and the renters who make it very difficult sometimes for rents to actually be fair. We have to stabilize rents in California. Third, then I think we have to take a look at what we can do to accelerate building, and that means that we have to take a look at what the cost per unit really is, and where can we help try to ensure that what it costs a developer to actually get a project going is taken into account and reduced as much as possible.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
So I think that the indicators that we're talking about around the affordability, displacement, population growth, total number of new homes we build are all really important indicators of the state's health and if we're moving in the right direction. But I want to go farther than that. I want you to hold me accountable for the things that we actually have direct control over in government and must do better. There is a lot we can do to speed up, not just at the state level, work with and hold accountable localities to make decisions faster. We can standardize building codes and pull out cost per unit. We need to be looking at those proxies of speed and cost where government actually has levers and be accountable for pulling all of those levers on our end and then keep checking the longer term indicators of number of units and affordability and population growth. But we don't have direct control over those. We need to get down into the weeds of all the things we do to add cost and friction in the system. That's why we're actually building less and less housing every year.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let's talk about the cost of building in California. So the cost of new multifamily building in California is more than twice as expensive here than it is in Texas. It's 50% more expensive here than it is in Colorado. So YIMBYs want to know, why do you think it's so expensive to build housing in California? And as governor, what would you do to bring prices down? And Mr. Mahan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the two that I think we have the most direct control over that give us the highest ROI, and those are impact fees and building code. Those are things that are completely within our control as government. These are policy decisions and trade-offs that we're making, whether explicitly or implicitly. On impact fees, as we've talked about, there's cities in our state, Fremont, Irvine, where impact fees are 20% of the cost of a project. It's become a tool for not building housing. The state has to step in and cap those fees and hold localities accountable. On the building code, there's special interest regulatory capture. I mean, we're building twice as many stairs as we need, elevators that are 4 times larger than they are in Western Europe, and on, thousands and thousands of layers of rules and requirements that aren't making us safer, they're making housing more expensive.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
Right now, it's about $100,000 per home that we pay additionally as Californians because of the red tape. What I would do is I'd put in place a 270-day requirement for all litigation surrounding housing, and also, as I said, to surge decision-making. Right now, the uncertainty and the inability of our courts to turn around decisions is hiking up the price. Deadlines. We need deadlines and shot clocks. I saw at the local level, when you move at that pace, when you move with that urgency, you can bring down the costs and get more people into affordable housing more quickly.
Thank you. Superintendent Thurman.
You know, I think our cities are using impact fees to make up for what they lost from redevelopment. Now, on my council, we didn't have the high impact fees, but I've seen how they have grown and how they proliferated. And I've seen various studies that show how our state ranks compared to other states. And it makes us, we are not competitive, and we're going to have to address those impact fees. And so I do intend to bring back some form of redevelopment from the state's perspective to help our cities so that we can begin to work to reduce our impact fees. I think our permitting processes are slow because our cities are afraid to act. They're afraid of liability. And we have to find ways to support and encourage and incent innovation and efficiency and moving quickly so that we get more projects in the ground.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
So I was worried that this was a trick question because I actually read the study. And so this is a RAND study that you're citing. It's a terrific one. I was like, wait, what? They told us the answer in the report. What they found was that it's the delay. So Colorado takes 22 months longer in California than in Colorado. That's one of their findings. I talk about this endlessly on the campaign trail. Colorado has environmental protections. They have worker protections. It's really a reminder that that adage, time is money, and is true. So you say, show me values or budget statements. So are clocks. Clocks are also value statements. So I think this is simple. We just have to do it faster. We could take 10 to 20% off right there.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
So I completely agree with the response on impact fees, that we have to figure out a way to make sure that local governments don't use those fees to recoup some of the resources they would have had to do the infrastructure that they need. I also believe that we have to address liability. Developers are so concerned about liability when they construct that oftentimes it kills a project before it gets off the ground. The third thing I think we can do is also move towards smarter, more efficient, more cost-effective development, which means modular. We work with our labor unions to make sure that we can actually construct homes that cost less to build. It is possible to do it. We just have to make sure that we work together to make sure that current workers, carpenters, and the rest don't think they're going to be displaced because of what we do. We make sure that we're paying good wages to those who do the job, but we can reduce the cost by going modular.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So obviously we're talking about three things here, and I think everybody's bringing them up. The first one is about fees. And again, I will say, these cities and counties are putting in these fees to pay for the bills that they're scared they're going to have if the buildings get built and the people move in. And that's why it's really important to bring money to the table, which I'm doing, so that in fact on a local level they can afford to say yes. The second question is timing, and it's absolutely right. It takes way too long, and everyone who said that, we've got to absolutely shorten those times, and we've got to hold people accountable. And the third thing, I agree with Javier. It's not just modularization, though. There's a revolution. It's past modularization, and it's 36% cheaper per square foot. The technology is here. We can do it. We can bring down these costs if we're willing to use the things that are at our disposal right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Controller Yee.
Definitely the delay in permitting. Look, time value of money is just so palpable in this industry, and we've got to do better there. But I also think that the fiscal incentives need to be there for our local agencies as well. So really going to be looking at that in addition to hopefully bringing all the tools to bear that can help expedite the permitting process.
Thank you. So now let's go beyond just discussing housing supply into other aspects of the housing policy. So again, apart from efforts to just boost housing availability for everyone, which policies would you prioritize to help the most vulnerable or excluded Californians benefit from quality, stable, and well-located housing? And for this, we'll start with Representative Swalwell.
Really focus on more apartment housing. And we saw this in Dublin. And yes, owning a home is the greatest source of wealth for most Americans, and we want more homeowners. But I also recognize that we have a shortage of apartment housing. And so in Dublin, what we were able to do was a blend of market and affordable, particularly putting them in the same neighborhoods, also putting them next to our BART stations, doing deals like real property exchanges. We have so much underutilized commercial real estate or state land or even federal land where we could do real property exchanges to build more apartment housing, surge supply, bring down the rents.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I think one of the things that we can absolutely do is try and meet that missing middle. And that is to build under less stringent regulations, 2-story to 9-story buildings that include, low-income housing as part of the project, which is the way we've always done this. And I think that the key to this is going to be how fast we get it done, and there are going to be rules. There's lots of specific things like the length of liability for a developer. I know that's a huge reason this hasn't been happening. But I also know the per square foot stuff actually works way past 9 stories, so that the technology is here to drive down the cost so that we can put in more affordable housing in every project, because the cost per square foot is lower, which means there's more ability to pass money on to low-income housing.
Controller Yee.
I'm going to go back to an earlier point that I made, and that is we really do have to just back up a little bit and talk about housing within a broader context of how we're building economically sustainable communities. What are we doing in terms of attracting business development? So if we actually increased all the housing supply and people are still commuting 2 hours to a job, like what is that? But to have like sustainable communities where we're driving business development, where our schools understand that there are going to be opportunities for their learners to have economic mobility, where transportation is front and center, not an afterthought as an infrastructure project. And so all of these things we have to have a vision about, and I would venture to say that people are going to invest in that, even the YIMBYs, because they see the potential for future generations.
Thank you. Superintendent Thurman.
You know, we have to build at every level, low-income housing, workforce housing, even for those who are more affluent. And you can use some of those proceeds to help to build more housing for those who are low income. But we have to, at the same time that we're doing this, we have to address those who are unhoused. 40% of those who are unhoused in California are older Californians who are trying to make the decision between paying rent and paying for food or paying for medication. The legislation that I'm supporting right now would provide $10 billion to build affordable housing. We also have to house the 10,000 homeless youth who are under the age of 18, who are unaccompanied minors, who are going to end up as homeless adults if we don't help them. And my legislation will also do that. And so we have to build housing for our families and our workforce, and at the same time build programs for those who are unhoused in the state.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
So when we use our precious public dollars to subsidize housing and build new affordable housing, we have to demand better from our government. Right now, there are many different funding streams that aren't sufficiently coordinated. It takes way too long to compile that funding, and we should have, and the state, as governor, I will insist that the state streamline and align all of these around a common application and make those decisions faster, because it should not cost 30% more to build affordable housing when we use your public dollars to try to provide something we so desperately need. And then beyond that, we need a lot more supply of different types. I have led and worked with legislators in Sacramento on condo defect reform. San Jose has led the way on ADUs, including for sale ADUs.
Thank you.
There's a lot more we can do.
Secretary Becerra.
I think infill development offers us one of the best opportunities to actually get housing out quickly at affordable rates for people where they need it. And so I would really make a boost for trying to do infill housing development as quickly as we can. Secondly, I go back to what I said previously. We need to have rent stabilization so that once we have units out there, people aren't being gouged. And the third thing I'll tell you is it's so important that we enforce our anti-discrimination laws, because we know there are people who try to get into some of these housing units but are deprived of opportunity, not because they didn't have the money, they just didn't look right or sound right. And we have to do everything we can to make sure that if there's a unit available, you have an equal right to compete for that unit if you got the money to pay for it.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
So this is about making sure those who sometimes are blocked out of homeownership or experience housing insecurity are able to experience it. I think we need to innovate in how we finance housing. This is my area of expertise. The 20% down payment is not backed by the data. Now, I lived through when it was ground zero of the 0% pick-a-pay loan. We don't want to go back there, but a 10% down payment puts homeownership, and it halves the barrier on homeownership. And the data suggests that would be enough. And I've written academic books about this. The other thing is innovating in the design of other kinds of structures, like longer-term leases. This is something Europe has. Why do people want to own? Because they get those benefits of homeownership. So we can have 5-year, 6-year leases, 4-year leases for our college students.
Thank you.
And the government has to back those, though, to do it.
Thank you. And we are right on time here, so we're going to move into the closing vision question. So all candidates will have 1 minute in order to respond here. And so 10 years from now, what do you want Californians to say you accomplished on housing? And what hard decisions will that require today? We will start with Controller Yee.
10 years from now, Californians will be proud to see their communities thrive, to be able to say to their next generation of family members, your future is secure here, and to also look around and to say, we have confidence about the growth of California's economy because we are a part of it.
Thank you. Mayor Mahan.
In 10 years, what I want more than anything is for young Californians to see their future here, to believe that the California dream is still alive and well, to be looking forward to creating families, building careers, building a future here. And ideally, if it's part of their vision of that dream, to know that there's a pathway to home ownership. And the way we're going to get there is by taking on the vested interests, whether it's the trial lawyers who have created the construction defect liability, or it's a very hard-charging and well-intended environmental lobby that has overreached. It is going to be the tough conversations of getting people around the table and saying we all, for our collective future, have to be willing to compromise and pull down costs so that we can increase the rate of building housing of all types for all income levels so everyone can have a future here in California.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra.
In 10 years, I want all of us to be able to say that we landed the plane in these turbulent times that we face, with these crises that we're constantly encountering, whether it's the man-made crises coming out of Washington, D.C., or whether it is the cost of living crisis we face here at home. We landed the plane. I want to make sure in 10 years people are saying that construction worker and that clerical worker, like my parents, can buy their home, send their kids to college or the military or to apprenticeship, and then retire here in their state of California. We do that. We take on these menaces that are troubling us. We'll be able to do that, but it will require us to do it differently. We will have to have built. In 10 years, we will have far more units. We will have a much more stable rent opportunity for people who aren't yet able to buy. And we will make it so that if you are young, you will be able to afford to get into that house because you're already paying rent. You may as well have the down payment, and we'll help you make sure you have the down payment to make that happen.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell.
10 years from now, California moms will worry less. California moms right now worry that their kids will go away to college outside of California, can never afford to come back, or that if their kids are here, they could never afford the rents or the pathway to home ownership. I'm going to do what we did in Dublin. But the problem with what happened in Dublin is no one else around us was doing it. Everyone else had gone no growth. And eventually, Dublin became just as unaffordable as everyone else because everyone else had gone no growth.
I had the experience of Cecilia Dawson, my mother, who was an immigrant who came here from Panama, who was a teacher in San Jose, who bought a home for her 4 children, who lost that home when she passed away when I was 6 years old and was sent to live with a cousin who I never met who lived 3,000 miles away. That would have been a great nest egg for my mother's children. And it was a representation of how the American dream is slipping away. The reason I talk about reducing permitting, increasing supply, is because I want everyone to experience what my mother and my family initially experienced in being able to own a home. We can control many of these processes. We can increase the supply, provide down payment assistance programs, and we'll be celebrating 10 years from now that we've done all those things.
Thank you. Representative Porter.
When I break the glass ceiling and become our state's first female governor, dads will do as much worrying and as much work as moms. I talked about my kids and about what I want for them. I want them to be Californians. That's who they are. No matter where they live, that's who they're going to be. So what do I want for them? I want to go visit them, not on my couch, in their own dwellings, with near transit that's transit accessible, that is climate resilient, that is innovatively built, and that is financed in a way that sets them up for long-term financial success. That's not for my kids, that is for every Californian. It's there for our taking. If we drive forward on good ideas in partnership, we are on the cusp of something great, and California YIMBY has built a powerful movement. I'm ready to help be a partner in it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Steyer.
So I think you have to go back to the question of why California YIMBY exists. And I say this, a house is not just an investment or an asset, it's also where you build your life. And of course it's about affordability. My whole campaign is about trying to make California affordable for Californians. But the truth is housing is at the center of the California dream. And I want to say one other thing. Working people have gotten screwed over the last 45 years consistently. And when we think about 10 years from now, we've got to think about how has that changed. So we're all talking about the same thing, the number of units, the price per unit, the kinds of units that we build in terms of who is getting an opportunity to get affordable housing that they can buy or rent and rent. But there's a real question. When I look back 10 years from now, I want to know that working people can afford to live here, that their interests have been prioritized, and in fact that we have a state that continues to be really successful, but that brings everybody along, specifically in housing, so that everybody can have the California dream, not just the rich people.
Thank you. So first, I think we need a big round of applause for all the candidates for that great discussion. And they even stayed on time, which, you know, I know for politicians can be a really tricky thing to do. I want to thank you, thanks all the audience members for taking this endorsement process seriously. I want to thank the staff, both the event staff, the hotel staff, the staff at California YIMBY, the staff for the candidates who put this entire thing on. So thank you very much. Look, California matters. What we do here impacts the world. California built the world's greatest system of higher education and research, a shared global entertainment culture, the most productive large agricultural region, the semiconductor, the search engine, the environmental movement. Hell, we even invented the skateboard and the mountain bike. I could go on. California builds the future, but we've also built something else. A housing shortage so severe that the very people who power the state, the teachers, the nurses, the agricultural workers, the entertainment professionals, the broad middle class, can't afford to live here. This is not a side issue. This is the issue, and voters know it. The next governor will inherit both our extraordinary strengths and our unfinished business. At a moment when the rest of the country is looking to California to lead, we have to make sure this is a place people can actually afford to call home. So please, join California YIMBY, join your local YIMBY group, stay engaged, be a passionate advocate for building a California where everyone can afford to live, work, and raise a family. If you want to learn more about where California YIMBY stands on this race or any other, please visit cayimby.org/endorsements. Thank you for your time. Have a great convention. Look at that, 12:30. Yeah. Thank you.